Hello, I'm Liz Lumley from Finextra, and today I'm speaking to Patrick Dixon of Global Change, and you are also a noted futurist, and you'll be giving the keynote address at EBADay in Berlin in May. So thank you very much for sitting down with me. You know, I've seen a lot of your clips on your website and on YouTube, and I know you talk a lot about mobile, and you know, mobile seems to be a really big issue in the banking world, especially over the past 18 months. You know, but what impact will these, you know, mobile, this digital revolution have in the transaction banking space?
Well, it all depends where you live in the world, but let's just look at this astonishing revolution. You know, for the last 10 years, I've been saying to some of the largest banks in the world that you need to think about telcos. And I've been saying to the largest telcos in the world, you need to think about banks, because these worlds have been converging for a while. If we just consider the speed of change in the last 12 months alone, if we think that 80% of all mobile payment transactions are taking place in just one part of the world, which is Africa. And of those, 80% of all those payments are taking place in just one country, Kenya. Using just
not even on a smartphone, on, you know.
Yes, using the most primitive of phones, using just one platform, which is M-Pesa. And today, 1/3 of the entire national GDP of that country is being transmitted using mobile devices. So, you know, can you imagine that taking place in America or in Germany or Switzerland? You can imagine regulators in those countries would have something to say about it. And especially since the M-Pesa system is now operating transnationally. So we've got M-Pesa exploding in Tanzania. And in other countries, it's going to be an African-wide phenomenon. And the same thing has been copied in Asia. Now, and then we turn to a big telco like Singtel. Most people in the world have not heard of Singtel. It's the Singaporean telco company, but it has 450 million clients around the world through all of its global collaborations and partnerships. Now, of those 450 million, I estimate that at least 200 million have no access to banking services, have never done a financial transaction in their lives, let alone a back-end payment trigger or something like that. They don't have credit cards. But 200 million people, just through Singtel alone, I estimate over the next 3 to 4 years, will enter the banking system for the very first time. And when they do so, they may not be using a traditional banking model to make those payments. They may be using an M-Pesa lookalike. They might be using a back-end payment system which is controlled by a telco and banking partnership. They may be doing a payment system which is using a pseudo credit card of some kind. But these are exciting days. You could never imagine so many people entering the banking system in such a short space of time using technologies which are basically free. So what's the future of mobile payments? I would say, therefore, the answer depends on the territory that you're in. And the scale of that evolution depends on the territory that you're in, but we are not going to go backwards here. This is a massive step forward, and it creates all kinds of challenges for banks in terms of the infrastructure they have, the kind of relationship they have with their customers. The banks need to get close to telcos to be able to make sense of the big data which they're generating. We're talking about transactions that are fixed by location, as well as by who's at either end of the transaction. It's where the people are when they make the transaction that matters. It's what mood they're in. It's being able to predict from using big data what kind of transaction they might be wanting to do next. It's being able to trigger marketing information at that very, very precise point so that they get fed, let's say, travel insurance at a time when they're traveling towards the airport. Yeah. You know, it's this kind of thing. I'd say watch this space. But very few large banks, in my experience, have fully got hold of this in their strategies.
Because I had a bit of a follow-up question to that, because, you know, you mentioned M-Pesa in Kenya, which had a liberal regulatory environment. And, you know, other payment initiatives in Africa, like say in South Africa, have not had as much success because there's a more established banking infrastructure in South Africa. You mentioned, you know, that 4 million people in Singapore, more people that live in Singapore.
Or it's not just in Singapore, but all the way around Asia and Africa, actually. These are the clients of Singtel.
Are we, since that's a significant number of people entering the banking space via the phone and via these payment mechanisms, are we going to look globally at almost like a two-tier system? There's that established banking infrastructure, and there's this growing other segment.
I think it's fascinating. I think we're going to see the continued rapid evolution of new models of financial services. I'm not even going to call it banking now. I hesitate to call it a traditional payment system. New models of handling money, which will be embedded totally within mobile, that will be part of the air that 1 billion people breathe. But the big question is, how many tens of thousands of them will actually live in developed parts of the world? The answer is probably very few. So I do think, I hesitate to call it a two-track, because that implies a higher track and a lower track. I do think we're going to see a parallel evolution, a parallel universe evolve. And of course, the banking giants will endeavour to capture as much of that and to restrain it and harness it and bring it into mainstream banking, as indeed the regulators will. And so there's a coalition of interest with regulators and banks, because regulators on the whole understand banks. So if your banks can sweep all this informal stuff into their own processes, then regulators are happy. Well, regulators are unhappy about things which they can't see, they can't quantify, they can't measure. So yes, I think it will be a tension. And rapidly emerging countries, it could be a country like Vietnam or Burma or wherever, these kinds of countries are going to want to be quite careful about over-regulating in a sector which requires rapid, huge-scale innovation. And it's in the interests of Vietnam, for instance, that every citizen is banked. If you think that Vietnam is a country with 90 million people, it has 110 million SIM cards. In fact, a higher rate of SIM cards per head of population than any country in the world apart from Switzerland. And yet its wage levels are only half that of China. So this is a young, vibrant, growing, emerging challenger to the colossus of China, which is on its border. Now, in that country, you only have a certain proportion that are banked. So why would the government want to stamp out all kinds of embryonic and informal payment systems? I don't think they will. I think that they will look for a mixed approach,
yes,
allowing the flourishing of entrepreneurial traditional banking and the flourishing of entrepreneurial non-traditional and informal banking.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the collaboration model as well as the future.